Racist cop blocks black woman, but her counterstrike reveals she once trained the force he relies on. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sarah Johnson was having a typical morning, but she could feel the tension in the air. It was one of those days when everything seemed too still, like something was about to shift, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was her turn. She'd spent the last few years of her life fighting for equality, for the very rights that some people seem to take for granted. And as a black woman in a world that sometimes felt like it wasn't built for her, she had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity. But today was different. Sarah was heading out for a meeting in downtown Atlanta when she saw a familiar figure in the distance. A police car parked at the side of the street, its flashing lights reflecting off the nearby glass buildings. As she approached, she saw him, Officer Mike Davis, the very man who, over the years, had made it clear through his actions and words that he didn't believe in equality, that he didn't believe in her. She had heard the jokes, the comments, the dismissive looks. Mike had always been the kind of officer who thought his badge gave him the right to judge others, to make assumptions about people based on nothing but their skin color. Sarah could feel her blood start to boil as she approached him, but she kept her cool. She had to. Today wasn't going to be the day he got the best of her. Mike looked up as she neared, a smirk forming on his face, one that was all too familiar. He stepped forward, blocking her path as if he owned the sidewalk. "You can't walk here, miss. You're going to need to move along." Sarah stopped in her tracks. She didn't flinch, didn't let the anger show. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "You heard me," Mike replied, crossing his arms. "Move along. There's nothing for you here." Sarah looked him in the eye, her gaze steady and unshaken. "You really want to do this today?" she asked, her voice low but carrying the weight of a challenge. Mike chuckled, clearly thinking he had the upper hand. "I'm just doing my job. You got no business being here." But Sarah knew something Mike didn't. She knew the game was about to change, and he wasn't prepared for it. In one swift motion, Sarah pulled out a small device from her bag, a recorder. She hit play. The sound of a familiar voice filled the air. "Mike Davis," the voice said, clear and concise. "I remember you well. You're the one I trained on how to handle situations like this." The color drained from Mike's face as he realized what was happening. Sarah wasn't just some random person he could push around. She had been the one who trained him, the one who had helped shape the force he now relied on, the very force that now was supposed to uphold justice. Sarah took a step back, letting the weight of her words sink in. Mike looked at her, speechless, his usual confidence replaced by confusion. She had turned the tables on him, and he knew it. The woman he had underestimated, the woman he had blocked, was someone who had once held the power to shape the very system he was part of. Sarah looked at him one last time, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Next time you try to block me, remember who trained you." Sarah stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch out. Officer Mike Davis, still processing the shock of her revelation, stood frozen, his arms uncrossed now, his usual confidence shattered. His eyes darted back and forth, looking for an escape, but there was no way out. He had underestimated Sarah, and now it was clear he wasn't in control. She had flipped the script entirely. Sarah could feel the weight of the moment settle around them. Mike's posture shifted, his earlier smugness gone, replaced by a nervous tension. "You train me?" he stammered, his voice almost a whisper. Sarah nodded, the corners of her mouth curling into a small, knowing smile. "I did, and I trained others too. The same force you rely on, the same one you think is above reproach." Mike opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came. He was rattled, his face pale. Sarah knew this was her moment to remind him of something far greater than the badge he wore. She wasn't just any black woman he could dismiss. She had been the one to lay the groundwork for everything he stood for. "You see, Mike," Sarah continued, her voice calm but firm, It's not just about the job. It's about understanding people, understanding power, and knowing when you have it and when you don't. Mike looked around, clearly desperate for something to hold on to, but his world was crumbling fast. Sarah could feel her heart pounding, but her exterior remained unshaken. You spent so much of your life judging people like me, treating us like we don't belong, like we don't have the power. But you're wrong. The real power is knowing how to make a difference, not just in the street, but in the system you're a part of. Sarah paused, letting her words settle in the air. She wasn't just confronting Mike. She was confronting the entire system that allowed men like him to act with impunity. You're just a small part of the machine, she said, and no matter how high you think you've risen, you'll always answer to someone. Mike's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah saw the flicker of defiance in him. But it was brief. He didn't have the strength to challenge her. He had underestimated her for far too long, and now the tables had turned. I've spent my career teaching others how to make fair, just decisions, she said. I've taught them how to serve the community, not harm it. You were one of those students, Mike. You were trained to protect, to serve. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees around them, as if nature itself was amplifying the gravity of the moment. Mike swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he knew he couldn't. The truth hung in the air like a heavy fog. Sarah had not only trained him, she had built the foundation that allowed him to stand there with his badge, his power. And now, she was taking it all back. Sarah stepped forward, closer to him. Next time you try to block me, Mike, remember who trained you. Remember who you really owe your position to. You don't get to treat me like this. Mike opened his mouth, but Sarah cut him off. And if you do, I'll make sure the world knows exactly who you are. The truth doesn't hide forever. She turned and walked away, her steps deliberate, her back straight. As she walked, she could feel the weight of the moment lifting off her shoulders. This was more than just a victory over Mike Davis. This was a victory over everything he represented. Sarah didn't need to shout to make a scene. Her quiet confidence spoke volumes, and the world would hear it. Mike stood in place, his hands at his sides, still trying to piece together the mess of his thoughts. He had been exposed, and he knew it. He had underestimated Sarah, and now he understood just how wrong he had been. As Sarah walked away, she could feel the weight of the moment begin to settle inside her. The sun was beginning to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows over the street. She had done what she had set out to do. The satisfaction of standing up for herself, of exposing Mike Davis for what he truly was enough to make her feel like she had won. But she knew it wasn't just about him. This was about much more than one man, one incident. It was about making a statement, showing the world that people like Mike, who thought they could get away with anything, could no longer hide in the shadows of their privilege. Sarah walked toward her car, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the quiet street. As she reached for the door handle, she paused. For a brief moment, she thought about the road ahead, the challenges she would continue to face, but she knew she was ready. Ready to fight for what was right. Ready to push forward, even when the world seemed determined to push back. She slid into her seat and started the engine, the car rumbling to life beneath her. As she drove, the city lights flickered past her, but her mind wasn't on the road. She was thinking about the years she had spent fighting for. Justice, the countless hours spent training, teaching, preparing for moments just like this. She had never expected the fight to be easy, but she had always believed it would be worth it. And tonight, she knew it was. She couldn't help but smile to herself. The battle she had fought with Mike wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. When she got home, Sarah pulled into her driveway and cut the engine. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel, reflecting on everything that had led her to this point. She thought about her work as a trainer, the people she had mentored, the lessons she had passed on. The knowledge she had shared had been her weapon, and today it had worked. She wasn't just some woman on the street. She had power. She had influence. She had the tools to take down the system that tried to keep her down. She got out of the car and walked to her front door. As she entered the house, the familiar smell of home wrapped around her. It was quiet, peaceful. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. But her mind didn't rest for long. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. She couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. The world wasn't going to change on its own. It would take more people like her to stand up and make the difference. And she would be ready. The phone rang. Sarah glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name. It was from her colleague, Ryan. She answered quickly. "Sarah, we've got a situation. You need to get down here now." Ryan's voice was urgent, and she could tell something was wrong. Sarah's pulse quickened as she grabbed her jacket. Whatever it wasn't over. She had just taken one step forward, but the journey was far from finished. Sarah grabbed her jacket, her mind already racing with thoughts of what Ryan could possibly need her for. She had just settled into a small victory, and now it seemed the universe had other plans. She didn't have time to dwell on it. With a quick motion, she locked her front door behind her and rushed out to her car. As she drove through the quiet streets, the familiar hum of the engine was barely enough to drown out the thoughts running through her mind. The city, with its towering buildings and neon lights, felt distant in that moment. She was focused, not on the world around her, but on the call she had just received. What was happening? She couldn't let it go. Ryan's tone had been too serious, too urgent. When she arrived at the office, the scene was nothing like she had expected. The lights were dimmed, and a group of officers huddled in the corner, looking anxious. Ryan met her at the door, his face tight with frustration. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "we have a problem." She didn't need any more explanation. "What is it?" she asked, already preparing herself for whatever came next. "It's Mike. He's making a scene. He's saying things about you, about what happened earlier today." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let her emotions show. "What kind of things?" she asked, keeping her voice calm, controlled. Ryan hesitated before answering, his eyes flicking to the group of officers. "He's claiming you manipulated the situation, that you've been training the force to undermine people like him. He's got some kind of evidence." Sarah didn't flinch. "He's bluffing," she replied firmly. But deep down, she knew Mike wasn't the type to go down quietly. She had made an impact today, and if he was willing to spread lies, he would do whatever it took to regain his control. The room fell silent as Sarah looked around at the officers. They weren't just hearing the rumors. They were listening to them. She could see the doubt in their eyes. Mike had used his badge for far too long to intimidate, to create a narrative that suited his views, and now it seemed like some people were starting to believe him. Sarah took a deep breath and turned to Ryan. "Let's get to the bottom of this," she said, her tone resolute. Ryan nodded, but Sarah could see the weight on his face. He wasn't sure what to believe. She knew Mike had a way of twisting the truth, but she also knew that Ryan wasn't the only one who could be influenced. "We need to have a meeting with the right people. This isn't just about me anymore." Ryan nodded again, his expression hardening. He understood. The officers in the room had already begun to murmur among themselves, some glancing nervously at Sarah. She knew that she had to act quickly. It wasn't enough to just prove Mike wrong. She needed to dismantle his narrative completely. Sarah wasn't just fighting for her own reputation. She was fighting for the integrity of the entire system, and she wasn't about to let Mike's lies destroy what she had spent so many years building. She turned toward the door, her eyes scanning the room one last time. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. She wasn't going to let Mike Davis win. Not now. Not ever. Sarah walked into the room, her mind focused and sharp, ready for whatever was to come. The group of officers was gathered around a conference table, their murmurs growing quieter as she entered. Ryan followed closely behind her, his presence steady but unsure. She could see that the room was filled with uncertainty, some officers looking at her, others glancing nervously at one another. This was it. Sarah knew that if she didn't act quickly, the narrative could slip away from her. She stood tall, every inch of her commanding attention as she moved toward the front of the room. She knew what she had to do. "All right, everyone," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I know you've been hearing things. I'm here to set the record straight." The officers exchanged glances, and Sarah could feel their eyes on her, measuring her, questioning her. Mike's words had clearly left their mark, but Sarah wasn't going to let that stand. She had trained some of these officers. She had shaped the very principles they were supposed to uphold. It was time for her to remind them of who she was and what she represented. Mike Davis wants to paint a picture of me, one that doesn't reflect who I am or the work I've done. He's trying to create doubt, trying to manipulate the narrative in his favor. But here's the truth, she continued, her voice strong and unwavering. I've spent my career ensuring that officers like you understand the power of justice. I've dedicated my life to training, to ensuring that we, as a force, protect and serve with integrity. Mike doesn't understand that, and I'm not going to let him tear down what we've worked for. She paused, letting her words sink in. She could see some of the officers' faces soften, a few of them nodding in agreement. But she knew there was more work to be done. She had to expose the truth fully, to make sure there was no doubt left in their minds. Mike's behavior today was a reflection of his own ignorance and bias, not mine. I didn't manipulate anything. I didn't twist the truth. I trained you all to uphold the law, to stand for what's right. And it's time you remember that. Sarah's eyes swept over the group, locking eyes with those who had once been her students. She had earned their respect. Now, it was time for them to earn her trust again. I'm not here to fight with Mike. I'm here to fight for the integrity of this force. I'm here to remind you that we have a responsibility to do what's right, no matter who's watching. The room was silent now, the weight of her words settling over them. Ryan stepped forward, his expression resolute. Sarah's right. This isn't just about one officer. It's about us, the entire force, and what we stand for. If we let Mike's actions slide, we're failing every person who depends on us. The officers exchanged more looks, the tension in the room thickening. Sarah could feel the shift. The group was starting to come together, starting to see the bigger picture. But she wasn't done yet. I've trained you all to be better than this, she said, her voice steady. Now it's time to prove it. Let's not let one person destroy everything we've built. She could see the determination in their eyes now, the resolve forming. She knew they understood. This wasn't just about Mike. This was about their duty, their responsibility to uphold the law with fairness, with honor. And it was time to stand up for that. We need to make sure this never happens again, Sarah said, her final words echoing in the room. We need to hold each other accountable, to remind ourselves what this badge truly represents. With that, she turned to Ryan, her expression serious. Let's get to work. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the office early, determined to take control of the situation. She had already made up her mind. Mike's actions couldn't be ignored. He had made his move, and now it was time for her to do the same. The room was quiet when she stepped inside, the officers already gathered around, their eyes on her. Ryan was there too, looking as though he hadn't slept the entire night. His face was tense, but there was a determination in his eyes now that hadn't been there before. Sarah could see that her words from yesterday had had an effect, but she knew that this was just the beginning. She walked to the front of the room, taking a deep breath before speaking. We're going to handle this the right way, she said, her voice calm but firm. Mike Davis made a series of false accusations yesterday, and it's time for all of you to hear the truth. The officers exchanged looks, some nodding in agreement, others still unsure. Sarah could feel the skepticism in the air, but she wasn't going to back down now. I didn't train you to cover up lies, she continued, looking directly at the officers in the room. I trained you to do what's right, no matter who's involved. No one is above the law, not even Mike Davis. Ryan stepped forward, his voice steady. We're going to investigate this thoroughly, he said, his eyes scanning the group. Every officer who was present yesterday needs to be involved. No one gets a pass. We're going to follow the evidence, and we're going to hold everyone accountable. The officers were quiet now, each of them processing the gravity of what had been said. Sarah could feel the room shifting. They were starting to get it. This wasn't just about Mike. This was about their duty, their responsibility to each other and to the public they served. We'll start by gathering all the relevant information, Sarah said, taking control of the meeting. We'll review the footage, the records, everything. No stone will be left unturned. She looked at Ryan, who gave her a small nod. He was with her on this, and that gave her the confidence to push forward. I'll personally oversee the investigation, she added, her voice unwavering. And if we find any evidence of misconduct, we'll deal with it. No one will be allowed to hide behind their badge. The officers nodded in agreement, and Sarah could see that they were starting to respect her leadership. She had made her point. This wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about making sure that integrity and fairness were upheld at all levels. As the meeting continued, Sarah worked tirelessly to outline the steps they would take. The investigation would be thorough, transparent, and fair. It would be a test of the force's commitment to justice, and Sarah knew that this was the moment that would define them all. By the end of the meeting, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The officers were on her side now. They understood what was at stake. They understood that this wasn't just a personal battle for her. It was a fight for the values they all swore to uphold. As the meeting came to a close, Sarah stood tall, her resolve stronger than ever. "Let's get to work," she said, the words ringing out with conviction. This was just the beginning, and she was ready to see it through. She turned to leave the room, her mind already moving ahead to the next steps. There would be challenges, but Sarah knew that she was capable of facing them. She had spent too many years fighting for what was right to back down now. And no matter what came next, she would never stop pushing for justice. The following days moved in a blur of meetings, calls, and strategy sessions. Sarah had taken charge of the investigation, making sure every detail was reviewed, every piece of evidence carefully examined. She kept herself focused, her mind sharp, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't shake. Mike Davis's words still hung in the air, and despite everything she had done to set the record straight, she knew it wasn't over. There were still those who doubted her, who saw her as an outsider rather than a leader, and the battle was far from won. As Sarah sat in her office, reviewing the latest findings from the investigation, her phone rang. It was Ryan. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's about Mike." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" she asked, already standing up and grabbing her coat. "I'll explain when you get here. Just come quick." The line went dead, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had a feeling this wasn't just another rumor. She was already halfway to the car before she realized she hadn't asked what the new development was. But she didn't care. Whatever it was, she knew it would change the course of everything. She arrived at the office just minutes later, her car skidding to a stop in front of the building. Ryan was waiting outside, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. Without a word, he motioned for her to follow him. They entered a small conference room where a few officers sat at the table, their eyes glued to the screen in front of them. On it was a video, one that made Sarah's stomach drop. It was a recording of Mike Davis speaking with a group of his colleagues. "This is a joke," Mike's voice rang out on the video. "She's using her position to manipulate everyone. She's been planning this for months. I'm just trying to expose her before it's too late." The video continued with Mike spouting off more accusations, some of which were clearly exaggerated, but the implication was clear. Mike wasn't just trying to defend himself, he was making an all-out attack. He was trying to undermine everything Sarah had worked for, everything she had built. "He's framing you," Ryan said, his voice low but intense. "This isn't just an accusation. He's trying to take you down, and he's using anything he can to do it." Sarah stood frozen, watching the screen, trying to process the reality of what she was hearing. Mike's words were poison, and he was poisoning the well, hoping to spread doubt and distrust among those she had trained. But Sarah wasn't going to let him win. She had faced bigger battles before. She had fought for justice when it seemed like there was none, and she wasn't about to let one man's vendetta tear everything down. "We can't let this slide," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We're going to take this to the highest level. We're going to expose him for what he really is." Ryan nodded, and the officers around the table began to speak up, their voices filled with support. They weren't going to let Mike tear apart the integrity of their force. They knew what Sarah stood for, and they believed in it. They had seen her fight for what was right time and time again. "We need to take action," Sarah continued, her mind already racing with plans. "We'll gather all the evidence we need, and we'll bring this to the chief. Mike won't be able to hide behind his badge anymore." The group nodded in unison. There was no turning back now. Sarah could feel the tide turning in her favor. The video, while damning, had given her the ammunition she needed. Mike had made his move, and now it was time for her to make hers. As Sarah stepped out of the room, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the integrity of the force, for the men and women who had trusted her, and for the values she had instilled in them. It was time to take Mike down, once and for all. The next day, Sarah stood before the chief's office, her heart steady, but her mind sharp. The air in the hallway was thick with tension. She had done everything by the book, everything she could to ensure that justice would prevail. Now, it was time to present her case. The video of Mike's accusations had been shared with the chief, and Sarah had compiled every piece of evidence she could gather to make sure that nothing was left to chance. She wasn't just fighting for her reputation anymore. She was fighting for the truth. As Sarah entered the chief's office, the room fell silent. The chief, a tall man in his late 50s, looked up from his desk. He was a seasoned officer, someone who had seen it all, but there was a sharpness to his gaze as he met Sarah's eyes. "Sarah, I've seen the footage," the chief said, his voice calm but firm. "I've gone through everything." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight with resolve. "Then you know what we're dealing with," she said. "Mike's accusations are a deliberate attempt to undermine everything we've worked for. He's trying to manipulate the system to his advantage." The chief didn't immediately respond. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. The weight of the moment was heavy, but Sarah didn't flinch. She had fought for this moment. She had worked her entire career to be heard, to make sure her voice mattered, and now it was time for the truth to take center stage. "I know Mike," the chief said after a long pause. "I've worked with him for years. He's been a solid officer, but I won't deny that his behavior in the past few days has raised questions." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. "It's not just his behavior, Chief. It's his attempt to manipulate the entire department, to use his position to spread lies and cause division. He doesn't get to do that, not on my watch." The chief's eyes softened slightly, but his tone remained measured. "I understand your concerns, Sarah, but I need more than just your word. I need facts. I need evidence." Sarah nodded, already prepared for this. She had everything she needed. "I have it," she said. "The video of Mike's own words, his attempt to destroy my credibility, is just the beginning. I've got the records, the testimony from the officers who were there. We've got everything we need to prove that Mike's trying to bring down the department from within." The chief studied her for a moment, his eyes searching her face. Sarah stood tall, unwavering, and after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "All right, Sarah, we'll investigate this further. But know this, if Mike is guilty of what you're claiming, he'll be held accountable. No one, not even him, is above the law." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't over yet, but it was a start. The chief had agreed to investigate. That was all she needed for now. "Thank you, Chief," she said, her voice steady. "I know this isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do." The chief nodded, his expression softening. "I trust you, Sarah. I always have. Let's get to the bottom of this." As Sarah turned to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose return to her. The battle wasn't over. But with the chief's support, she knew they had the chance to make things right. She wasn't going to stop until Mike Davis was held accountable, no matter what it took. The truth had to prevail, and Sarah would make sure it did. In the days that followed, Sarah stayed focused, knowing the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. The investigation was underway, and things were moving fast. Mike Davis had been pulled into a full departmental review, his every action and word under scrutiny. As Sarah had predicted, he fought back, using his connections and influence within the department to push his narrative. But it didn't matter. Sarah had already laid the groundwork for the truth. Every piece of evidence was in place, and the more the investigation unfolded, the more Mike's web of lies unraveled. The officers who had witnessed his behavior began to step forward, some reluctantly, some eagerly, all revealing pieces of the story that Mike had tried so hard to bury. Sarah's phone buzzed as she sat at her desk, deep in thought. It was Ryan. "We've got him," he said, the words dripping with both relief and certainty. "Mike's been lying about everything. The team's been going through his records, and we found multiple instances where he misused his position. It's all adding up. Sarah felt a surge of energy run through her, but she kept her composure. Good, she replied. Let's make sure this time it's the truth that gets out. Ryan's voice softened. This could be the end for him. He's been the department's golden boy for so long, but now he's been exposed for what he is. Sarah nodded, although she wasn't about to let herself get caught up in the excitement just yet. She knew Mike wouldn't go down quietly, but she was ready. Every word he had spoken about her, every accusation, every attempt to destroy her, was now coming back to haunt him. The chief had already promised that Mike would be held accountable, and now, with the evidence mounting, there was no turning back. Over the next few days, the tension in the office grew. Sarah could see the change in the officers who had once looked at her with doubt. Now, they came to her for guidance, for answers, for reassurance. They weren't just following her lead. They were beginning to understand what she had fought for all along. Mike's influence had been shattered, and the cracks in his armor were widening. Sarah had always known that leadership was about more than just taking charge in moments of triumph. It was about standing firm when the world tried to knock you down. And that was exactly what she had done. As the week drew to a close, Sarah found herself in a meeting with the chief again, sitting across from him in the same office where they had discussed the investigation just days earlier. This time, there was no doubt in the air. Mike's fate had been sealed. It's over, Sarah, the chief said, his voice steady. Mike's been removed from duty. His actions have been proven, and he's been dishonorably discharged. We're taking immediate steps to ensure this never happens again. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling a deep breath she didn't realize she had been holding. It was done. She had won. Thank you, Chief, she said quietly, the weight of everything she had been carrying finally starting to lift. But we still have work to do. This can't be the end. We need to rebuild trust, not just with the community, but within this department. The chief nodded. I agree. And we'll do that. Together. As Sarah walked out of the office, she felt a sense of pride that she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. The battle had been long, and the journey had been tough, but she had come through stronger than ever. She had fought not just for herself, but for every officer who believed in doing what was right, and for every person who relied on the department to serve them with fairness and justice. She had stood her ground, and now the truth had triumphed. Sarah had always known that the road to justice wasn't an easy one, but with the right people by her side, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that they were finally on the right path. And nothing was going to stop her from making sure it stayed that way.